I'd like to talk today about the cultural history of sawfishes and how that might be used in conservation efforts. And as I said earlier, my background is anthropology and archaeology, and I've been studying the cultural use of sawfish for about 20 years. Oops. All right, so look at three topics. I'll look at uses, which for conservation purposes, trade is the major use. Impetus to preserve, local cultural value as being something that we can employ to market sawfishes and make people concerned about them. And then what culture might teach us about historical and modern range. And essentially, the gist of this project with culture is that it matters for conservation what we think about sawfishes and how much we think about them. And there's several ways we can look at the impact of culture. And every society cares about certain animals, and which ones become important just has to do with the vagaries of history and society. And generally it's charismatic megafauna. And how much we care about a particular species has an impact on how much we interact with it in various ways. And one way we can look at is scientific attention. For instance, if we look at published literature on particular species, I culled information regarding various well-known sharks to the general public versus some batoids, and you can see that the great white shark, for instance, literally has 10 times the literature of the average sawfish. And this is a problem. There's a study that just came out maybe 2 weeks ago by Gibb, I think was the main author, looking at the efficacy of the Endangered Species Act and how we can judge which species are doing better and which are not, and what the factors are that contribute to that. And they found a direct correlation between the amount of published literature on the threatened species and the percentage of funding it receives versus what it needs, which I don't think either conclusion is dramatic, but it just shows that for sawfish this can be a problem because we don't have as much literature on them yet. Another way we can look at cultural value is how much we give threatened species. It's not surprising, for instance, that the top 10 species for the last year the U.S. Endangered Species Act has data for, fiscal year 2010, the top 10 species are all prominent sport fish or food fish and one iconic woodpecker species that got an average of $37 million, while sawfish got 1.5. So sawfish are getting 4% of what the average top 10 species gets. And note that we're not looking at animals that are all endangered. The top 10, only 3 of them are endangered. The rest are just threatened. So we're not prioritizing money based on threat. It has something to do with cultural value. So the first topic I'll talk about is trade, and certainly the most disturbing aspect of sawfish trade is shark fin. And I'll start with talking about batoids. In the studies that we have for the shark fin trade, they look mostly at sharks. Very few people have mentioned the fact that the fusiform batoids are all high value, and in fact in the shark fin trade in Chinese they use 2 designations for fins. There's white fin, which actually is the beige batoid fins, and there's black fin, which is the standard steel gray fins of sharks, and the white fin is generally higher value. This is the caviar of shark fin. It's a smaller scale trade. It's harder to catch batoids than sharks, but there's a targeted fishery in Indonesia looking for Rhynchobatus, and they have different ones that are high value, like these are all rhina fins from the bowmouth guitarfish, which in some sources are the absolute highest grade. Some say sawfish are, some say Rhynchobatus is. This is some species of Glaucostega. It might be typus, it might be thoin. It's got this trailing upper lobe on the caudal fin, which may be diagnostic, but I've seen the same fins, it looks like, from Indonesia all the way to Egypt. They're used to combat diabetes. What you see when they prepare the batoid fins is that they will keep it intact because they're high enough grade that they will stay intact, and this proves that you're getting the right thing. The shark fin, if you boil it, will break down into individual noodles, but the batoid fins will stay together. And this is called bao chi, which is abalone fin. It's the really high value fin. For instance, here's Rhynchobatus for $550 a pound using its trade name Churnche. This is pre-packaged Rhynchobatus fin with the same trade name. So if we look at sawfish, we can look at the websites of shark fin traders, and there's not a lot of shark fin traders that have websites, and fewer actually give catalogs of what they have, but a few do. This is a Chinese website, and this is Huangjiao, which is I found is the common trade name for Pristis genus fins. It means yellow glue, and that yellow for being beige and glue because sawfish fins are famous for being especially glutinous, which is a positive characteristic for shark fin. We also see Anaxopristis. So this is an Australian dealer who apparently is sourcing its fins from Indonesia. They use Hiu gergaji, which is the Indonesian name for sawfish, and then a trade name for the fin, Panchas, which I can't figure out what that means, but that's a commonly used trade name for Anaxopristis fins in Indonesia. This is an Indonesian trader who's selling Anaxopristis fins, just found that a couple months ago. And the trade name for Anaxopristis in Chinese is Mian Churn, which means cotton group. And this churn is a trade name for batoid fins generally, because reportedly you can catch them in numbers. And the cotton reference is because there's white flecking on the surface of Anaxopristis. And there's not a lot of pricing information available in the shark fin trade. They keep their data pretty close. But for instance, we have recent information from Kenya that this is what the fishermen are paid, up to $3,900 for a set of fins. So I don't even know what they would be charged at the commercial level to the consumer. And here we see there's anecdotal evidence of the antiquity of trade in sawfish fins. The earliest references we have in the West to the shark fin trade from 200 years ago talk about large-scale exploitation of sawfish in areas far afield. That the Chinese were already going to Eritrea, they were going to Venezuela. I've got several references that sawfish were being exploited on some sort of large commercial scale very early on, which begs the question whether sawfish were depleted 100 years ago or even 200 years ago. The other trade that's a little disturbing is traditional medicine. I've found 9 countries that have traditional medicine involving sawfish. Most of it does appear to be low volume. And the good news here is that in the conservation community, finding legitimate medicinal uses for animals, while can be disturbing if there's an actual trade for them, is beneficial if it can be synthetically produced, because that might decrease the demand for the product, and 2, that gives a very high commercial cultural value to the animal that can be used to generate interest and funding for the animal. The pharmaceutical industry, for instance, would be very interested to find new products from new species. For instance, here, this is a medicine seller from Bangladesh from just a couple years ago, and you can see down here he's got the edge of a large tooth saw and a small large tooth saw here, and they scrape these rostra to make a medicinal powder that's usually used in a tea to combat pain. It's also used for the same purpose in parts of India. This is from Patricia Charvet, which is these are small saws that are taken in Brazil, mostly for respiratory ailments. This is a page from a modern Chinese medicine manual, and you can see we've actually got sawfish in Chinese medicine references as early as 1600, but these are updated. They're actually giving chemical compositions, which is interesting. So here's a list of some of the medicines I found so far. And what's interesting is I had an ethnopharmacist look at this, and what he thought was interesting is that the uses are remarkably consistent. If we have a widely distributed species and it's used for medicine, we often see almost a random amount of treatments that it's used for. And here it's remarkably consistent. So there may be some actual efficacy here, and it would suggest an anti-inflammatory use. And this is supported by Eritrea, where they have liver oils medicine. They only catch a few sawfish a year, but they catch a lot of sharks. But they're not using sharks for the same purpose, so there may well be some efficacy to it. 2 minutes already. Cockfighting trade, another disturbing use. This is in Peru and Ecuador, and you can see that right now the price is just updated in the last couple weeks. It's going for $80 to $220 US for a pair of teeth, and one rostral tooth is used to make usually a set of spurs. They use sawfish because they did systematic testing in the 70s to determine a natural product to replace sea turtle shell, which was the traditional use when the roosters actually got larger. And after testing all sorts of bones and antlers, they found that sawfish kept their point and kept intact longer, and that the surface area, or the surface of it, caused greater body damage than other materials. A term that they, or a property they call ponzoñosa, which means poisonous. Yeah, they attach it to the legs. And here's a website, for instance, selling these spurs, and for $60 a pair. So they're sourcing these animals, from what I hear, from Panama, from Ecuador, from the Caribbean, from Brazil. The curio trade, not huge, but we see about 200 saws a year on eBay. We see large, nice saws on Sotheby's and Christie's. The price varies consistently with length, and we see they go very high, especially if they have some sort of cultural value. And I'd mentioned that the eBay trade has not really decreased, even though there's supposedly a ban since the CITES listing, and that's because eBay actually has a policy where they supply information to, or they don't supply information, they depend on stakeholders, which are normally companies combating copyright and trademark violation, to report infringing items which they take down. And so for sawfish, that would require some agency to be scanning eBay and apprising them of offending products and having them take down. So no one's doing that, and eBay themselves don't police their data because they say there's 6 million new listings a day and they can't keep up with all the laws around the world for prohibited items, so they just don't do anything. And maybe the last topic, meat, leather, and liver oil. None of these are big now. There was opportunistic use for meat worldwide. Liver oil back in the 1800s, and then in the maybe about the 1930s, we saw companies in India and America and a couple other areas exploiting sawfish to make vitamin A liver oil. Leather, never a huge item, but occasionally produced. But of interest here is an advertisement I found from several newspapers in America from 1975 and 1976, and this is selling Lake Nicaragua meat that was exported from the catastrophic fishery in the 70s. This is a Lake Nicaragua sawfish. So they made it all the way to the United States. We had both these steaks, and they apparently also were used in some fish sticks, and that population has never recovered. Am I out of time?
Yeah.
Okay, well, all right.
We can be a little bit relaxed if it's something that
yeah, well, like that. I was going to talk about cultural values, but that will be a whole separate project. Cultural value can be very useful tool for conservation because we need to generate interest in sawfish, and especially at a local level, to get people to care about the plight of sawfish. And for instance, in Mexico, for 2,000 or 3,000 years, there's been a belief among several Indian groups that the entire world was created from this titanic sawfish that lived in the primal ocean before there was mankind, before there was the earth. There was only this giant, chaotic sawfish that the gods or people had to conquer and create into the world. For the Aztecs, for instance, this animal was called Cipactli, and here's a modern Indian group, the Zapotecs, and they still recreate this combat with this titanic sawfish that was the founding of the world. And for the Zapotecs, that was the creation of society. It was only when the fishermen decided to work together that they could actually form a society and overcome this giant sawfish that was destroying their nets and preventing them from feeding their families. And that kind of thing, is all over the world. In Panama, they actually have a belief about sawfish which parallels our belief about dolphins. They see that they were put in the world by the Creator to protect mankind physically from, they patrol the coast up and down and protect us from crocodiles and sharks and whales, which they see as dangerous. They say that sawfishes will protect people and save them from drowning and take them back to shore. And amazingly, even they protect us in the spirit realm. They believe that when you get because sickness spirits take your soul into the watery underworld and hide it. And what you need is a shaman, and this is a matrilineal society, so many of the power positions are held by women, know how to go into the underworld and find your soul. And they can't do it alone. They've got helper spirits, like this guy's called a Nuchu, and he actually knows how to find the soul and combat the evil spirits that have taken it. And amazingly, one of the only animal spirits that will help them, she'll sing a special song when she gets in trouble, especially by these titanic crocodiles that protect the spirit, is they call golden sawfish spirits that come and help, and they will actually keep the crocodiles and the sickness spirits at bay while the shamaness is able to retrieve the soul and bring it back to our world, which will make the person well again. You can see the child has fever lines coming off of it. And I guess I'll end on this. This is the sawfish have central symbolism in many cultures, just not in ours. And this can be exploited in the Congo, not an area we normally would associate with sawfish. For instance, instead of Justitia, the Roman blindfolded goddess, as a symbol of judicial impartiality, the sawfish saw is the symbol, and it's from the proverb, Chichiela Chiambafu, sawfish rostrum, all that went in front I cut the same. And this is from their observation of sawfish sitting in shallows, and they'll hit any fish that comes near them, and they said justice must be the same, that even if the king's own son commits a crime, he should be punished the same as the poorest person. And so it's got very positive symbolism, and it's this sort of symbolism that we should exploit in our conservation efforts to create a cultural personality for them. They have no personality in the Western world right now, and they're not receiving much attention, and it would behoove us to use this cultural symbolism to actually create this personality so that people are concerned about them. We've got a dolphin safe tuna campaign, but we don't have any campaign to make sure that fisheries are not taking sawfish. For instance, Indonesia, Islam is said to have been brought to Borneo by a guy who rode a sawfish, and so he became known. And we don't know his real name. All we know him as is Tuan Tunggung Parangan, Mr. Sawfish Rider.
Great, thank you.
Okay. We'll end there.